Hello and welcome to another episode of TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group. Today is Thursday, February 4th. And like every week, we've got a great show this week. Today's guest is Lauren Bernard. She's the co-president of the Brookline Parents Organization. And we're going to talk about the BPO and what their role is in thinking about education, specifically K through 12, but also BEEP and early ed in our town. But first, the news, and things are starting to settle in. President Biden and Vice President Harris are settling in. We're seeing some action from them out of executive orders, and some of their secretaries and other folks are being appointed. So that's exciting. We also saw out of the Senate a power sharing agreement nearly identical to the one in 2001. Of course, the Senate is tied 50-50 with Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris breaking the tie. And so all of the committees are chaired by Democrats, and they've got a power sharing agreement. Hopefully, both sides are able to be productive and pass legislation that recognizes that in a democracy, the majority wins, and hopefully they can do it in a way that is helpful to people. TBD. At the state level, really, there's only two things to talk about. One is the climate bill. House and Senate last week passed the identical language and sent it to the governor. The governor is signaling that he isn't happy with it as is. Specifically, he's unhappy with a 50% emissions reduction by 2030. He wants that cut to 45%. And he's unhappy with the net zero stretch energy code for municipalities to opt in. And it's not clear if he will cut that section, if he will propose to weaken that section, but he really has until this weekend to do so. I expect he will release his proposed amendments tomorrow afternoon, knowing that they are unpopular in Massachusetts. He will want to bury it in the news, and so Friday afternoon would be the way to do that. And I expect that he will propose amendments that weaken those two portions and maybe some other areas as well. Then the Democrats have a supermajority in the House and the Senate. And the question is, will they reject his amendments or will they accept his amendments? We'll find out probably next week. I expect the House and Senate will both vote on Governor Baker's proposed amendments to weaken the climate bill next week. But we don't know yet. It hasn't happened yet. TBD. The other state level news, of course, is vaccinations. Currently, Massachusetts is on pace to vaccinate about 110,000 people a week. That's roughly 1 million people every 2 months. And with over 6 million people in the state, that's a year. And that's too slow. And everyone agrees that's too slow. In fact, there are about 400,000 vaccines currently unused in inventory in Massachusetts right now. It's my belief that the DPH and the governor haven't done a good job here. And I don't know of anyone who thinks they have. Some fault is not theirs, some fault is with others, but certainly some fault is theirs. And my hope is that they are able to figure out how to increase the number of vaccinations per day and per week in a way that is safe and effective and fair. And the sooner we do that, the sooner we'll all be safe. Currently, those 75 and up and those in phase 1 are receiving vaccinations. And it's not so easy to get an appointment, so I encourage you to keep trying. And if you have any real trouble, or if you feel like you were treated unfairly, please give me a call. 617-872-8921 is my telephone number. For policy matters, things that aren't as urgent, send the email, tommy.vitolo@mahouse.gov. But if you need help now, your best bet is to give me a ring, and anytime about vaccinations or really about anything that you think I can be helpful with. I'm happy to try to help. At the local level, things are fairly quiet. There's some conversations right now that the public schools of Brookline are having, the school committee is having about next year's budget and what next year is going to shape up like. And of course, with town elections coming on May 4th, now is the time to start thinking about running for office if you haven't yet. There are 2 positions of select board that are to be elected. There's town clerk, there's moderator, there are 4 library trustees, there's a constable, vacancy, as well as town meeting seats. And I may have left even a few out. And so I encourage you to have a look and see if this is your time to take a more active role in participating in our community and setting the agenda and setting the path for Brookline. I don't want to belabor the point. I want to get on to this interview. And so we're going to cut over to an interview I recorded last night with town meeting member, Coolidge Corner resident, and co-president of the Brookline Parents Organization, Lauren Bernard. So we'll see you on the flip. And as promised today, we've got Lauren Bernard from the Brookline Parents Organization. Lauren is a town meeting member. Lauren is, no surprise, a parent. And Lauren has really been instrumental in putting this organization together and getting it started. Lauren, welcome to the show, and tell us just what is the BPO? What are we talking about here?
Thank you, Tommy. The Brookline Parents Organization is really an organization that on the one hand advocates and on the other hand gives voice to parents who otherwise have not felt like they had much voice. And in some ways you could say those are one and two of the same, but we really see those as different functions. We came together, kind of a disparate group of parents who felt at the time that our educational priorities were not really happening in the schools. I can give you an example that really kind of gripped me. A parent I met, I believe from the Runkle School, and she had a child at BHS and a child at Runkle, and she felt that the educational experience of her older child, her much younger child, were very, very different. And she started speaking about the educational experience of her older child and that of her younger child. And we had a lot of parents in the beginning that were like that, who were saying, why is my younger child getting such a different experience than my older child? And other people saying the opposite, I was much happier with what my younger child's getting. So we had this kind of group of parents who had multiple children who were getting different experiences and weren't satisfied with the contrast. So that was one set of people. Another group of people were very involved in question 2, the ballot question 2 about the cap on charter schools in 2016. And that was kind of a coalescing factor where a number of us were against, were voting no on question 2 and felt passionately about it because we felt it would drain more money from public education in the state. So that was kind of a coalescing factor as well. And a lot of us were worried about the progression of the ed reform movement. Corporatization of public schools is what a lot of people say, that there was an ed reform movement, and we felt that our school committee at the time was more influenced by the ed reform movement than the not being responsive to the wishes of a lot of parents. So those were sort of some of the factors that got us together. And we started after, having meetings, talking, getting to know each other. And that's how we started.
And so, you coalesced around some combination of national and state educational direction as well as local concerns. But no doubt things have evolved over time. And so before we sort of work through some of the things you worked on, there's this great line from a movie called Office Space, and the line is, "What would you say you do here?" Right. So, what does the Brookline Parents Organization (BPO) do? How do they act? How do they engage with decision makers and with the community?
Well, it takes a lot of different forms. Sometimes it comes to us. We get an email or a phone call or a text from a parent saying, I want to talk about something I've noticed in my child's education or what's going on in my child's school. Sometimes it comes from us, for example, and sometimes it's a combination of the two. Sometimes it comes from teachers. One of the things that we got involved in pretty early was the whole question of recess. we realized that recess was very different at all of the different elementary schools in Brookline. At one school, kindergartners had two 20-minute recesses. Another school, kindergartners had like a 1 30-minute recess. Another school, there were two recesses up to second grade. It was all over the place. And basically, most parents who approached us, this is just an example of how something came to be, said, we really want more recess. Almost every kid wants more recess. We have parents telling us we want more recess. So that was an example of how some parents came to us. We as parents felt our kids weren't getting enough outdoor time. And then we actually had teachers who came to, I can speak for myself, who came to me because I work in a school, and saying, I just don't feel that we're getting enough time outdoors. So it's a combination of all those things. So we have a website, brooklineparents.org. We get people who write us. There are people that my co-president, I haven't mentioned Benjamin Kelly, who is the co-president of the Brookline Parents Organization. People that we just know, people who approach me through town meeting, and then just things that I notice working in a school, for example, other teachers who, come to us because they know that we can advocate for what we think is best and they think is best for their students. So it's kind of a mishmash of things. Things come to us and we go after certain things. For example, we get interested in some of the subcommittee meetings of the school committee. We're interested in policy. We're interested in curriculum, and those are things that kind of we go after. So we are a very fluid organization in the sense that we have a lot of different actors involved, and sometimes basically something boils to the surface that we all feel is important, and then we make an event, or we start organizing about something.
You mentioned events. My interaction with the BPO has often been through these conversations with the community, and pre-COVID, of course, they were in person.
Yes.
Right. Now maybe they're on Zoom for the time being. Perhaps there'll be hybrids in the future. And I remember the first one I went to was this conversation about recess. And then there was one a few months later about MCAS testing, which strangely may actually be related. But tell us about how those conversations with the community went, and what sorts of people one might expect to see there, guest speakers. How did it all come together, and how did those first few conversations, how did they feel?
So in November of 2017, we did an event on what you spoke of, the recess, when we call it Whatever Happened to Recess. And a lot of us had read a book by Dr. Peter Gray, who is a researcher at Boston College, called Born Free, I believe. I mix up sometimes his book with his
Play Deficit Disorder, I think is the name of it.
Well, that was the presentation.
Oh, okay.
The book actually has that's why I'm mixing up. The book actually has a different name. But someone in our group had seen him speak elsewhere and said, wow, this is exactly the kind of thing we're talking about. And we contacted him, we asked him and said, could you give us, could you do this presentation, Play Deficit Disorder, a national crisis and how to solve it locally. And we did it at the library, the main library, Hanneman Hall. And that came about because, like I said, a lot of us were concerned about recess and outdoor time for kids. Teachers were talking about it with us as well. And one BPO person had actually seen him speak, and we were interested. And we got a really great cross section of people at that event. That was a very successful event. I think we had about 60 people, and we had teachers, we had parents, we had a few kids. We had community members who had an interest in early childhood education, who may or may not have been parents, were just community members. I saw a smattering of town meeting members, and we were very pleased with how that first event went. So that kind of gave us a momentum. and we had a few high school kids who said who were concerned that their siblings were getting more or less recess than they were, which was kind of amusing. But it turned out to be a good event that brought people together.
And then you did the MCAS one just several months later.
Yes. So one of the things that we've been interested in, and a lot of this was born out of the question to the cap on charter schools lifting, that was defeated. Um, one which was an initiative backed by the corporate ed reform movement. Another thing, so what came out of that was we noticed that a lot of people who were supporting question two were also huge supporters of high stakes testing. On a personal level, I have always disliked high stakes testing from the time I was a student to when I was teaching to, as a parent. I just, I think I don't think it's a good thing. And as I, spoke to other people, Ben Kelly felt passionately about it as well. A lot of us felt very passionately about it. And then we were contacted by some educators, not just in Brookline, elsewhere, saying, one of the things that's so difficult about high stakes testing, again, I use high stakes testing because, in New York, it's the Regents. I mean, they have different names. In other states, it's Park. Here, it's MCAS, is that it forces teachers to get through a certain amount of material by the time the test is given. And so you have this expression, teaching to the test. And I saw this play out very, very personally. And I saw, an example, kids, for example, in third grade, they're supposed to learn their multiplication tables. And at one point, just like I said, I'm in the school a lot. I had a kid at the time in third grade. They weren't learning their multiplication tables. They didn't know them, but yet they were on division. And I'm thinking to myself, well, how can they be on division if they don't know their multiplication tables? And I went and spoke to the teacher, and she said, I would love to spend more time on multiplication. I would say 70% of this class does not know their multiplication tables. And yet I can't. I have to move on because I have to cover a certain amount of material before MCAS hits, before the MCAS is given. I have to cover this material. So that's where I really saw playing before my eyes, this teaching toward the test. And a couple of us did some research, and we found out that there were some pretty noteworthy advocates against high stake testing. Jeanette Duderman had a grassroots organization from Long Island that grew and grew and grew and grew. And now I don't know the current number, but at the time that she spoke, something like 60% of Long Island public school kids were not taking the Regents. And Professor Ricardo Rosa, who is a more local academic, he also felt that it was an equity issue. Children of color and children from disadvantaged backgrounds simply don't have the opportunity to, the questions are geared in such a way that they don't have an opportunity to really do well on a test like that. So we did this event trying to talk about the inequity of the MCAS and just the kind of pressure it puts on kids, the kind of pressure it puts on teachers. And wouldn't it be nice to find another tool that can act as some kind of standard and not a high stakes test thing? And, so far we still have MCAS, but I think there are more and more people who question whether it's a good thing. And last year we didn't have MCAS. This year I don't know if it's actually been decided. I heard they were still having MCAS, and then I just heard they weren't in certain districts. So it's up in the air because of COVID, and it will be very interesting to see after these 2 years of, school interruption and different, a different model of school, what happens when we don't have MCAS? Is everything going to come crashing down as people have, implied it might? So I think we're going to see. I think I personally, I would love to do another event on MCAS post-COVID and see, what are we left with here? We didn't have MCAS for a year or two. What does that mean?
And so the first two events, I think, were unquestionably stimulated by state and national conversations around
Yeah.
education. Certainly there was relevance in Brookline, but there was a bigger conversation.
Yeah.
I think the next two events were much more locally focused, right? I think one was on kindergarten and making sure there was joy in learning, and then conversations essentially around what do we want out of a superintendent in Brookline, given some turnover there. And so your organization very nimbly recognized, hey, we've got some local things. That doesn't mean that these aren't issues that aren't important elsewhere, but these were things that were very hot specifically in Brookline.
Exactly.
And how, I guess you figure that out because you're talking with other parents and folks talk and drop off and pick up in other times. Did the organization have any trouble pivoting to something that was in some ways much more personal, right? It's not abstract when you're talking about your kindergarten teachers and your current and future superintendent. Would you have any trouble with that, or was that just sort of par for the course?
No, we didn't have any trouble with it. So many times these things just come out of conversations. And the first couple of events, we were talking about national conversation. We were just having there were these pressing issues in education on a national and state level, and then I think you're right. The next thing was the community conversation with the kindergarten teachers, but that kind of straddled national and local because their letter made it into the Washington Post. Um, and it was syndicated. And I had a friend that I hadn't spoken to since graduate school, who's a professor in Eugene, Oregon, who called me at Oregon State. And she called me and she said, "Don't you live in Brookline?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, I just read this most incredible article, and our public, NPR in the Eugene area just featured this." So even though that was a very local event, it got national attention. And I think some of this has its roots a little bit in the recess. Some of its roots in the recess event and the conversations around recess, because kindergarten teachers were some of the teachers who came to us very eager for a discussion about recess. And again, and this goes back to sort of the move towards that we felt was kind of tone deaf with what parents in the district were saying about standardization and that sort of thing. And so even though it became a very local and personal thing for us, I mean, like my son's kindergarten teacher was involved in this, and Ben's children's kindergarten teacher was involved in this, and others. I mean, and they wrote this letter basically beseeching the school committee and the central administration, please, let's not over academize kindergarten. The children learn by play. Play is very important. And the letter was poignant. It really resonated with so many people. And I so that pivot wasn't difficult at all. And we jumped on that. And it's a continuing conversation, because a lot of the things they've asked for they haven't gotten, and that is partially due to all the changes we've had in administration. So I would say it was not difficult to pivot, and we may pivot back to that, because it's, like I said, it's a continuing thing. But many parents were very supportive of that as well. That brought a lot of people, a lot more membership, because who can disagree with your kid's kindergarten teacher, right?
That's right. Well, in fact, I have a kid's kindergarten teacher. My daughter is in kindergarten at Pierce School.
Hmm.
And one of the things I've noticed is in the COVID era, there are substantially fewer conversations between parents, particularly
Right.
parents who aren't besties, parents who know each other casually, but wouldn't even know each other's phone number, no less necessarily
Right.
call them on the phone. And one consequence of this is there's less of a feel for what the community is thinking about different issues during COVID, right?
Definitely.
sort of parents are a little more siloed and a little more isolated and not really sure what everyone else is thinking because frankly, those conversations at drop off and pickup are less common. Kids are being dropped off and picked up less. But also these other extracurricular activities and shopping and all of these other things where you would run into parents,
Right.
it's not happening. And so BPO has had 6 conversations in 2020 having something to do with COVID. And so can you talk about the BPO's role in a COVID era in supporting parents around all of the changes related to education and COVID?
So when we did our first virtual event, which was after the whole pink slipping uh, event this spring, and we called it Understanding the Moment. It was a very difficult moment. Teachers were most of them just kind of temporarily laid off, and it was a hard time. But we thought we want to have some clarity because it was a scary time for a lot of parents, for kids who understood that they might not see, what if I don't see my teacher again, that kind of thing. And so we wanted to sort of shed light on the situation from both sides of the table. And we really initially thought, gosh, this is such an important question, but is anybody going to watch this? I mean, everybody's so zoomed out, right? Nobody's going to watch. And Ben called me the um, the morning I think that we sent the first notice out, and he said, "We have 600 registrations." I said, "What? 600 registrations?" I said, "Are you sure? Not 60 registrations? No, 600 registrations." And by the time, and we had gotten a Zoom account for I forget how many, and we had to like up it to the next one. And by the time the event took place on May 31st, we had, I believe, close to 1,700 people watching. And then they had to watch through YouTube or on Facebook, and it was streamed. Um, but I think the latest tally was we had close to 2,000 people watching that. So that was really interesting for us and a little scary because we initially thought, are we going to get anybody? Because people are so tired of being on Zoom. So, I think there were many factors, but I think one of them is exactly the kind of thing you were hitting on is that people are not running into each other. They're not having discussions at pickup, at drop off. If you see someone in the grocery store, it's, you're constantly being reminded, don't linger here, don't linger there. You might not recognize them because they're wearing a mask, right? And it was a way to sort of, even though we weren't necessarily all talking to each other, the chat was interesting because people were having, conversations in the chat as well as putting forth questions. It was a way to just sort of take the temperature of your neighbors, take the temperature of people you normally speak to, as well as the importance of the event. I mean, I can't, ignore that. It was a very important event. And we had a moderator who, although she's local, everybody knows her, Meghna Chakrabarty. So the combination of things. But I think you hit on something is that we've had a better response to all of these Zoom events than we initially anticipated because people are really, it's a way of connecting, imperfect, but it is a way of connecting. So so that's sort of, that was the one that we got the highest amount of attendance for. Apparently it was the highest attendance of any event that the town has seen, is what we heard, which was pretty incredible.
I remember it. In fact, I was one of the guests. Maybe there's something to it. You may not know this, but there are tens of thousands of people who watch this show every week, all over the globe here on Brookline Interactive Group, and so it wouldn't surprise me at all. What do you have any sense for what's next? What can we expect from the Brookline Parents Organization in 2021? Big dreams, big ideas, anything brewing?
Well, I mean, I think what I mentioned before, we're kind of interested to see if, especially if this year, if there's no MCAS, to have sort of a follow up. I mean, I can't speak for the rest of the board, but something I'm interested in would be a follow up to see, well, we didn't have MCAS for a year or two, and guess what? The district is still standing. So what, what does that mean? Can we get by without these sort of high stakes? So I personally would like to see us return and sort of do a second run at that. We did this colloquium on great school leadership in December of 2019, which was really exciting and a lot of work, really exciting. And we co-sponsored it with Boston University's Wheelock School of Education and Human Development. And we brought in really respected superintendents from all over the East Coast. And we had this terrific keynote speaker, Ramon Gonzalez. And that was very exciting. And we got a sense of, we wanted to really just have people hear and feel what great leadership sounded like. I would love to do another event where we had panels. We're thinking about something big like that, especially after COVID, and we can do another in-person event. We'd like to do another in-person event with a bang, celebrate the return of the in-person event. I don't know what the subject would be. It could still be something about leadership because we still don't have a superintendent. But there's lots of things. The event we did on the science of reading got a lot of interest. We've gotten a lot of people saying, could you do something else? And, like a sequel to the whole thing on reading, because it was so interesting, brain science. So there's a lot of, we're talking about a lot of things.
So we'll have to stay tuned, right? BrooklineParents.org is maybe the best place. I know you also have an email list, so folks would want to subscribe to the newsletter if they want to hear from the BPO. I have no doubt you're always looking for folks to be more involved.
That's what I'd like to if I have just a couple of minutes, is one of the things we really want to do more and more is have representation in each school. And right now we would love to hear from folks at a couple of schools that we don't have a lot of representation. Lincoln is one of them. And we could use some more representation from Driscoll. We really want to have a wider representation. South Brookline, I think, is not quite as involved as North Brookline. So just a little appeal out there. We're fun people. Come join us.
Well, I have no doubt folks will. Lauren, thank you for joining us on the show today. Thank you, Brookline Interactive Group, for showing us, but also, of course, for showing the BPO events. And we've had another great week. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Lauren, thank you for joining me. And we'll see you next week.